Alrighty, here we go. It's Chapter 7. We're working on the skeleton. Part 1, we're going to deal with the skull bones. Overall, we're going to have 3 playlists for the skeleton. I'm going to break it down so that we can learn the playlists at slightly different intervals and go slowly through the skeleton. I like it that way because you have a much more thorough learning. And you need that in order to learn muscles properly, to have a good learning of the skeleton. Okay, we begin, of course, with the axial skeleton, page 199 and now 200. And you'll notice that the axial skeleton is actually listed here as a color. Okay, so it's this sort of aqua kind of color here with the skull, the vertebra, the ribs, the sternum, and so on. And that's the order in which we'll learn things. We'll begin with the skull, okay? And what we're going to do with the skull first, as the big overview, is we're just going to learn the bones. Here's the anterior view of the skull, and we have an artistic rendition here which lists here the skull in various color-coded bone presentations. Okay, as we look at the back of the skull, we'll notice also that we're color-coding the bones. If you look over here at this little orange unit over here and over here, that is the temporal bone, is the orange bone off to the side. And again, you'll see it right over here. This is the temporal bone. They show us the mastoid process of the temporal. So we're maintaining the color coding, okay? One of the things that you'll see also is that there's some detail in all of this. They're showing us openings of the skull, the infra-orbital foramen, the mental foramen, and so on. Here's another supraorbital foramen or notch. And let's not look at those right away. First, learn the bones. Learn whether they're singular, like the frontal bone, or whether they're paired, like the 2 nasal bones right here. We also have a paired bone right here, which is the maxilla. Okay, off here, we have this sort of bluish hue over here, a metallic bluish hue, and those cheekbones that we think of them as, they're going to be referred to as the zygomatic. Okay, so, and then as you begin to learn the bones, you come down through the nomenclature, 3 things at a time. I strongly recommend you learn things 3 things at a time because the human mind is made of, how shall I say, a logistical setup in terms of how we deal with the circuitry, that 3 things at a time is going to be very efficient. You can hold it that way. So you learn 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, so on. You study for 20 minutes, you take a break. Okay? That's sort of the key to learning things that are involving just pure memory work. Okay, I have a little notation up here to remind me to tell you the word to articulate is equivalent to the expression form a joint. Okay, so an articulation is a joint, and the articulations common up here are sutures. Okay, so they sort of fit together, they sort of interdigitate with each other and they fit together. This is the idea. Flat bones work that way. So we have sutures here all the way around this way. We have a suture right here, but we can't make it out. Okay, and that's because we have a left and a right maxilla, and that's just the way it works. It's also important to note which bones are singular here. So the frontal, the mandible, right here we have a couple of singular bones. They're not paired. This is the ethmoid bone in here that has that color. This bluish colored one here is the vomer. It sits on top of the hard palate of the maxilla. Okay, you'll notice that we have paired bones like the zygomatic, It's paired. This one is paired maxilla. The nasalis is paired. We have this pink thing over here, which is actually a singular bone that reaches throughout the central part of the skull. It's called the sphenoid bone. As we flip the page, we'll discover that we're maintaining the yellow color for the frontal. We're maintaining this metallic blue color for the zygomatic. Here's the maxilla. Here's the nasalis. Now coming into view is the lacrimal. That's a bone right there through which tears flow. It's got a channel going through it. Here's the zygomatic. The temporal bone. Excuse me. So the zygomatic forms an arch with the temporal bone called the temporal zygomatic arch. Okay, and you'll see also here that there's a suture. And if you look carefully, there's sort of an attempt by the artist to show interdigitation. Notice that the mandible articulates right here in a roundish colored condyloid shaped bone structure, and that's the temporomandibular joint. This is not touching another bone. This is actually grabbing muscle right here. There's a strong muscle that closes the jaw that we'll be learning about. Okay, and then as we go further, you might also take a look at the actual skull. This appears to be a real skull, and you can tell that that's the case because of the fine definition and nuance in the sutures here. Oftentimes we have plastic skulls that have been made from a mold of a real skull. But here you can actually see a great deal of detail, and some of these openings are anomalous. They're just unique to this particular bone and to no other bone. Over here we have some nutrient vessel openings that are unique to this particular skull. Okay, so over here we have the mid-sagittal section coming down the middle. You can see how the ethmoid bone sits on top of the vomer. The vomer sits on the hard palate right here. Okay, and over here we have this large bone at the base of the skull, and this is the occipital bone. Okay, and then as we turn the page again, we have the view from the inferior aspect. Here's this big bone at the bottom of the skull, and this is sitting on the first vertebra right here, and it's able to rock back and forth, frontwards and backwards. Okay, so this is the occipital bone right here. There are some large lines that indicate that there's some significant musculature that has an attachment site here and pulls on the bone. So by Wolff's law, this sort of, grows out toward the muscle. So the muscle has something to hold on to. And these are referred to as nuchal lines, a superior and inferior nuchal line. Okay, again, the vomer is right there. Now we actually see a new bone that's unique to the palate. So we have two sides of the maxilla here. This is the perpendicular plate of the palate. For the maxilla, there's teeth inserted here. And then we have the palatine bone. The palatine bone actually reaches inward up to the orbit of the eye. There's a small piece of it there. Okay? And then finally, we're going to be looking at this particular view in great detail. Okay, so I have some pictures over here that are going to demonstrate what level of detail we're going to look at, because we're going to find openings and we're going to find cranial nerves in the openings. So that's for a later date, but I'm just giving you a heads up. It would be good to learn the basics here, this sort of simple view. What bone is this? That's the frontal bone. This is the top of the ethmoid bone that forms this thing called the cribriform plate and the crista galli. Right here we have the sphenoid bone. This is a good view of the sphenoid, and it shows you that the sphenoid is sort of like a keystone. It actually touches many other bones of the skull. And I'm going to give you a little research question as to which bone of the skull does it not touch, okay, because it touches so many.